Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search builds great teams by connecting lawyers in Texas with career opportunities at small and boutique law firms. So if you're thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel Hare back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. I hope you and your family are both healthy and safe. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a few positions we are currently searching for. In Dallas, we're looking both for construction litigators as well as just general commercial litigators. In Houston, looking for a high-end commercial litigator as well as an estate planning associate. In Austin, also looking for estate planning as well as a family law attorney. And then in San Antonio, an insurance coverage attorney. So a lot happening. That's just a few of the ones that we are currently searching for. So if you've got either interest in one of those or just want to visit about the market and see what else might be out there, would love to hear from you. Daniel at varsitysearch.com or varsitysearch.com/lawyers. All right, today we are in Dallas where our guest is Morgan McPheeters. Morgan is an appellate attorney who launched her own firm, McPheeters Law, in 2019. Morgan handles appeals in civil cases and works with trial lawyers at the trial court level to develop and execute their litigation strategy across both Texas and New Mexico. Morgan has been a Texas Super Lawyers Rising Star each of the past 4 years, a Best Lawyers Under 40 selection by D Magazine, and most recently was named the 2021 Brenda So Rising Young Lawyer from Texas Women Lawyers. Morgan also won the John Howie Award for her courageous pursuit of justice in the face of adversity and ultimate victory at the Texas Supreme Court in State of Texas versus TSN. That case changed expunction law to ensure that Texans who have been arrested but not convicted of a crime receive a fresh start. All right, with that, let's hop into our conversation with Morgan McPheeters on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Morgan McPheeters joins us right now. Morgan, thanks so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
All right. Well, before we get into the part where I ask you about your practice, because that's normally what we start with and what you're prepared for, I do want to mention one quick thing here at the top and ask you about it, because I just saw on your Facebook page before we hopped on here that you recently won an award, and I want to talk about it. So it's the 2021 Brenda So Rising Young Lawyer Award from Texas Women Lawyers. So first of all, congrats on that, and tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you so much. I just found out about this a couple days ago, and I'm really excited. Texas Women Lawyers is an awesome organization. It's a statewide women lawyers organization here in Texas. And they are gracious enough to give me this award this year. I had a couple mentors that I really look up to who nominated me, and it's really exciting.
Well, that is really cool. So congrats on that. Super proud of you and excited for you.
Thank you.
And that's just really awesome. So great job. So now I will ask you to tell us about your firm. What you were originally prepared for. I know that you're like me. We kind of launched out around the same time and doing our own thing, and so that's kind of cool as well. So I'd love to let the folks listening hear about your practice and tell us about how it got started.
Sure. So I am an appellate lawyer. I practice out of Dallas, although I'm kind of all over the state in terms of my docket and cases. So I handle civil appeals, no criminal. Although I am open to that, I kind of would like to dip my toe into that at some point. But to date, just mainly civil side. And, I handle the occasional commercial or family law type matter, but mainly I am typically representing plaintiffs in personal injury cases.
Okay.
And so, half of my practice, give or take, is handling civil appeals. So everything after the trial court level, after an appealable order or a final judgment. And so, I'm in the courts of appeals, I'm in the Texas Supreme Court, and that's kind of its own sort of contained universe. And then the other part of my practice, which is really fun, is I'm actually working with trial lawyers at the trial court level on their substantive legal issues, motion practice, error preservation. So a lot of what I do is research, writing, strategy. I will help draft pleadings. I'll respond to summary judgment, help draft the jury charge, sometimes even go to trial and sit and preserve error the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of unique. It's interesting. It's always something new and something quirky because, appellate lawyers just don't tend to get hired on really black and white simple cases. And so it keeps things interesting. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned kind of the second part of that, because I think that when we talk about appellate law, most often it's the former, it's the post-judgment or post-verdict situation. Okay, we need to appeal this. Let's go get the appellate lawyers involved and all that. I think it's really interesting about your practice in really embedding yourself with the trial team at the early stages and at the even pre-trial, in the motions phase and all that as well. How prevalent is that in the appellate world? Or is that like a new kind of trend, or is it something that gets discussed a bunch? But I know from you and your practice that's what you guys have done.
I think it's, certainly for more complex cases, larger cases, it's the way to go. And as appellate lawyers, we love to tell trial lawyers, hey, this is what you need to do. You need to hire us. But it's great because number one, there are so many boxes, as you know, that need to be checked in order to preserve your right to appeal. Or if you win something you want to hold on to be able to defend an appeal from the other side. So that's really important. And all of that happens at the trial court level. The other thing that's nice about this kind of arrangement is that it really allows you to divide and conquer, because you can have everybody kind of divide up the tasks. When you're getting ready for trial in a big case, there's a lot to keep track of, a lot of moving parts. It's really nice, I think, for trial lawyers to know if we're at trial, they're focused on making sure they pick the best jury possible, making sure that they can tell their client's story in a compelling, chronological way. And, they're not sometimes as focused, or they don't have the bandwidth sometimes to be thinking about the jury charge or to be thinking about evidentiary issues and presenting those arguments. And so it's really nice to know that an appellate lawyer like me is sitting there solely focused on preserving error and making those arguments. And then the trial lawyer can focus on telling their story, connecting with the jury, all those other great things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I want to also give you an opportunity to share about, I imagine this is something you have dealt with. And so I think there'd be a lot of benefit to, especially the female lawyers listening. You joked about telling the trial lawyers what to do. And and that makes sense. And I'm wondering about, and you are a relatively still young female lawyer. How have you navigated that? I imagine within the legal profession and with some of the lawyers that you work, that is, at least if nothing else, a new thing for them to have a lesser experienced younger lawyer. And then and the female component on top, I'm wondering how that's been for you and what either you've learned or encouragements you have for those listening about how to kind of work in that world and with those lawyers that are more your senior and mostly men, I would imagine.
Yeah, that is often, probably most often the case. I think most trial lawyers still today are men. Most of them are probably white men. Those stats are changing pretty quickly, but that's still the case. But I will say, it's not really been an issue that I've really had to confront or anything like that. It's kind of, it's probably the scariest part of what I do is just knowing that, people look to me as being the book lawyer. I get that
Yeah.
a lot. I'm like the nerdiest of the nerdy lawyers. And with that comes
Yeah.
pressure to get it right, which is, something that I struggle with all the time. And I want to make sure I'm getting it right. And, a lot of us have imposter syndrome on top of
Right.
that. But the world of appellate law it's stressful in its own sense. It's, I don't know, but I will say of the trial lawyers I've worked with, they seem to trust me fully and we work together great and it's a great relationship. And I think that as a young lawyer, you just kind of have to trust that you have the skills to back it up. You might not know every answer right off the top of your head, but no one does. And I think kind of recognizing that and learning that lesson, that what you come out of law school with is your work ethic and your skill set, a set of tools to find the answer, and that you're not expected to just know it. And that you can have confidence in yourself that if you're confronted with something or somebody calls you and they're like, hey, I've got this quick appellate question, you can find the answer. And so that takes some confidence and some time, and it's something I'm still working on, but it's just part of the gig.
For sure. Tell us a little about how you decided to launch your own firm and do it in the way that you're doing it now. I know that, speaking of scary things to do, I'm sure that was and maybe still is. So I imagine there are people listening who are at a firm right now and have thought about whether it's next year or 5 or 10 years from now launching, their own practice. And so I'd love to just get your story about that and just thoughts on launching your own firm.
Well, so the good thing about being an appellate lawyer is I sort of really only need Westlaw and a laptop and Wi-Fi.
Yes, of course.
Also, that's a good thing.
And that UPS box, right?
For everybody. Yes, definitely need a UPS box. I know that when we were both going out on our own, we commiserated over the steps of getting started and when to get your UPS box. But anyway, the moral of the story is just go get the box. Go get the UPS box right away. Get that out of the way. That's the easiest way. Yeah, once you got the address, everything else just flows from there. But yeah, I think that it's different it's certainly different depending on your practice area. And I have a lot of friends, obviously, that are personal injury trial lawyers that I talk to, and they're like, oh gosh, it seems so daunting to go out on your own. And it is. But for me, it's a different kind of daunting than they would face, where, a personal injury plaintiff's lawyer needs to fund litigation. And so you need a lot more capital just to get going. Whereas, some of my work is contingency fee, some of it is hourly, but I can really just kind of hit the ground running and start doing briefing. So that's definitely a perk of all of this. And I don't want to make it seem like it's just easy and accessible for everyone to go out on your own. But I think that I was lucky enough to start my practice with a really great appellate firm that gave me such good mentorship and opportunities. Their culture is very much, you brief it, you argue it. And so immediately I'm getting to argue summary judgment motions and appellate oral arguments. And the experiences I got there were really, really valuable. And I don't know at what point I started to kind of consider going out on my own. It wasn't something really ever in law school or early on in my career I ever considered, because it seemed too scary. It seemed insane to me that anyone would go out on their own. But I think I just got to a point where I kind of wanted to just give it a go myself. I'm a very independent person. I just want to try it myself, and I want to see what I can do, and I want to push myself. And so I decided to just give it a go. And I kind of got to the point where I realized that you're always waiting in life for the perfect time, the right time to do something. And there really isn't ever just a right time.
That's
so
so
I just
good.
went
I'm glad
for
you
it.
said that.
I went for it. And, it ended up, I went out on my own September 2019, which thinking about the calendar, and time seems to be non-existent anymore. And,
Yeah.
I don't really hardly even know what day it is,
Right.
but 6 months in, the pandemic hit. And so it's a strange time to be a small business owner and going out on your own. But it's, knock on wood, it's worked so far, and I've been busy.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, starting business from scratch, basically, in the best of environments, is still challenging in a lot of ways. And then, to have the pandemic thrown on top of it, I'm sure was just another curveball to deal with that we just
yes, and now I have to do math, which is not my thing. The business side of things and the accounting and all of that is, something that isn't really taught in law school. And so you kind of pick that up as you go. I do have a business degree, although a lot of that has left my brain. So
right. Law school has a way of purging all that other stuff out.
It does. It really does. It demands a lot of space.
Yeah. No, and it's such a great point about the right time, because for super hard things like that, and I remember people telling me that. We have 3 young kids now, elementary age kids, and I remember that advice on that too. Like, there's never a great time to have kids. Like, it's just, they're young, old, whatever. There's always issues. It's going to be hard, and the whole thing. And so, but it's similar with starting a business, I think too. Like, just there's just now and so or whenever, but like there's always going to be challenges. And so and that I think goes for people, switching positions too, not just starting their own business, but finding the right time, the best time, perfect time, whatever, to leave and go somewhere else. I think I talk to a lot of lawyers that are going through those timing issues with transitions as well. And there's just not most of the time the perfect time. And
it's always going to be scary. And
that's right.
I think I definitely had a mindset for a long time that once you decide to do something, you have to just keep doing that thing forever. And I had such a great experience at that firm. Don't get me wrong. And we're still great friends and text them all the time. But I think there's a mindset that, like, when your first job out of law school is where you have to be forever.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. And I think it's not the case for most people.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. Well, we touched on the pandemic a little bit, so I want to ask you just briefly about that. And before we hopped on and started recording, you were telling me about doing a Zoom argument just recently, earlier today, I think. So how has COVID impacted your practice from a standpoint of kind of your day-to-day and the work that you're doing? And what do you see kind of moving forward as we hopefully get beyond this in the next hopefully few months?
Fingers crossed.
What things go back to normal, what things are changed forever? How does that kind of impact your world?
Well, so it's going to be interesting seeing, we've got the recent announcement from the governor that things are going to be opening back up. It'll be interesting to see how that impacts the courts and what they do with that, and whether we start getting back in person for things. But in terms of, how it's impacted the appellate side of things, it really hasn't much. I will say the appellate courts did a great job very quickly transitioning to doing Zoom oral arguments. And I have stayed very busy, thankfully, the whole time. And I know that some areas of the law have seen things slow down quite a bit. So that's been really nice and lucky. But the appellate courts just kind of kept rolling. Yeah. And so, briefing is briefing. And as long as you've got, like I said, Wi-Fi and your laptop, you can file briefs, for better or for worse. So the biggest thing is just shifting, I think, to doing that oral advocacy over Zoom, which is interesting because, I went to Baylor. At Baylor Law, advocacy is everything. And there's just something different about being in a courtroom in front of, the 9 justices of the Texas Supreme Court versus being on a Zoom gallery view with them. And you're trying not to talk over each other. And that was an issue I had. I've had 2 two Texas Supreme Court oral arguments during the pandemic, both of them over Zoom. Both times I had Wi-Fi issues, which was terrifying. As like right at the very beginning, as they're putting you into, the breakout room that is the argument, mine just completely went down, which was, really gets the blood pumping.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I was able to salvage it, get back up and going. But it's kind of interesting because, in real life, in person, you can there's just that interaction is different, and you can kind of tell when a justice is about to ask a question. And over Zoom, there's that audio lag and you end up talking over each other. It's just a different ball game. So to many extents, I will be anxious to get back into the courtroom and do these things in person. I just think it's better for everybody. But at the same time, I have appreciated the efficiency and the accessibility that Zoom hearings and arguments have brought about. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how much of that stays in our court system and how we adapt going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem like, and I think a few weeks ago we were talking about how, in general, I've been impressed from the stories I've heard of the way that most courts and judges have adapted to the technology as a necessity to keep the courts flowing at some level during this pandemic, but then what is expected moving forward. And that, especially for maybe non-key witness depositions or, non-controversial, orders or hearings, things like that, used to take up half a day or, depending on where people are coming from, full days and stuff. It can now be done super quick and done online, and hopefully we'll continue to do that. So, hopefully we'll learn and take the best of this moving forward. And the one thing now, I guess, the next time your Wi-Fi freezes, you can just make a crack about, well, at least I don't have a cat filter over my face, right?
Yes. Man, that was the best thing that had happened in weeks when that video went viral. I loved that.
Oh, it was fantastic. Ready to go, Judge.
Yep. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
Well, I want to transition just a little bit. You talked about the firm where you started and where you learned and all of that. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about maybe something that you learned there in those first couple of years of practice that really stuck with you and you felt like was a great piece of advice that you continued to fall back on.
I think the biggest thing I learned early on, which it carried over from law school, but that feedback, and especially feedback about your writing and your advocacy, is a gift. Yeah. And I had a mentor at that firm. All three of the partners in the Dallas office, certainly mentors, but they were really good about giving detailed feedback about writing and giving corrections. And I had a professor in college who would joke that your first draft, when it comes back, it should look like you killed a chicken on it, just red everywhere. I've always remembered that, kind of gruesome. But, that, I think for a lot of young lawyers and for law students, that can seem like such a blow to get back a draft that just looks like it's been just shredded. But it's such a gift. And for someone to take the time to go through your writing and find ways to help you improve is so invaluable. And so the lesson of just always improving, we can always improve our advocacy, we can always improve our writing, and to be able to learn from people and to take that in, absorb it, and try to be better next time. And always be looking for ways to make things better, I think is a great lesson that they did a good job of teaching.
Yeah, that's great. And it kind of goes along with the theme that we'll hear, 25-year partners talk about, which is, it's the practice of law, and you're always learning something new and always getting better, always improving. There's not a static element to it. There's no place that you get to where you've reached some milestone of, okay, I cannot learn anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know everything. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's especially true in appellate law because you do kind of every new case is kind of a new little almost specialty where you're learning a new area and learning a new quirky fact and how that fits into things. Or if you've got undecided issues out there in the case law, it's just constant learning. And that's what really kind of keeps it interesting and, keeps me engaged. And I think that's, the idea, the expectation that you're going to be a lifelong learner in the law is a really good mindset to have. I try to keep that mindset that that I'm just going to keep learning. Some lessons you learn the hard way, and some you just work through it. But we're just always learning.
Right. No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, is there anything that you picked up more recently that you wish someone had shared with you when you were a younger lawyer getting started?
I think. Well, I mentioned that I have to do math now. The business of the practice of law is different, and you've got to learn how to handle your IOLTA trust account for handling client funds, and you've got to make sure you've done that properly, and your accounting and getting invoices out and collecting, all of those things that just, aren't taught in, torts 101 in law school.
Right.
And so that's kind of that's a learning process for me. Other than that, I mean, something I've been contemplating lately is just saying when to say no to business when you just don't have the bandwidth. As a young lawyer and as a recent, firm kind of coming out into the world, you don't want to say no because there's always that fear that they'll never call back.
Yeah.
If if you're too busy this time, they'll find somebody else and get plugged in with them, and that's it. But I think that's something that is important to know when you need to say no, when you want to say no, when you should say no. And I'm still working on that. I hate saying no.
I hear you. I hear you. No, I mean, I've gone through that same thing with whether it be law firms or candidates where just, either on, whether it be on like just values not aligned or just, I don't think I'm the right person to help them for whatever reason. But it's hard because you're just, like you said, you're just trying to get this thing going and you don't want to put out there that you're not available to people. And you also want to keep the lights on and so money is money. And so, I mean, I don't know about you. Like for me, I've been, and it's hard. Like I've been trying to figure out how to always like make long-term decisions when it comes to stuff like that and not short-term ones. But it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, totally. And that's, I think what makes it hard too is, I'll get a call about a really interesting case and I'm like, oh man, I really want to work on that. And it's hard to know when it might really get going and when, briefing schedules are sometimes a ways down the line. And then sometimes there's things that are fire drills. And so trying to manage your time and your docket and estimating not only how long things might take you, but when they might be due and how that will interact with everything else on your plate. That's tough. And that's definitely a skill. And I certainly have not mastered it yet, but something I'm working on, hopefully.
Absolutely. So when you obviously, over the years that you worked, in your prior firm and now that you've started this one, you've, I'm sure have observed and learned yourself as an associate when you were there, but also just in observing others that you worked with either in your firm or, colleagues or friends, in the community. What's maybe something that you have found is, important for a young lawyer and associate to do in terms of trying to stand out and really getting their career on the right track and impressing the others within their firm?
I think that, obviously having a strong work ethic is kind of the core basis of all of that. But also I think that you can really stand out by making yourself indispensable in a certain niche area.
Yeah.
Whether that's something within the dynamics of your firm administratively, or whether that's finding some emerging area of the law where you can become kind of a little expert.
Yeah.
And that can lead to developing business, or it can just make you within your firm kind of the go-to person on this issue that keeps popping up.
Yeah.
Getting involved in organizations that are relevant to your practice and that kind of make up or at least lead to a client base can be really, really helpful. I mean, there's lots of things that young lawyers can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny, and you mentioned it, and obviously you're in a specialized area in appellate law, even in firms that have multiple practice areas, you can certainly identify some areas, either industries or practices to niche down in and work in and become the go-to person. And like you're talking about, become that indispensable piece. It is amazing how many lawyers I talk to who are afraid of that and don't want to get pigeonholed, right? And I think that's a real fear. And I think what's missing in that is that just because you maybe are, especially at the early stages of your career, you become kind of the go-to person on X, Y, or Z industry or practice. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what you're going to be known for and do forever, and that you're not going to do anything else. Like, it may only be 20% of your practice or the firm's practice, but if you're the go-to person for that, you're indispensable. Even though the other 80% of your time is going to be on more general matters or other things that the firm handles. And so, but it just means that for that 20%, you're indispensable, and it just opens up so many doors and allows you to market yourself on that issue in such a way. I just think it's short-sighted, and it's sort of a fear-based thing, I think, for people to worry about getting locked in or, becoming, trapped by some niche or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think things are constantly moving in the law. Like, take, for example, let's say that you become kind of the little go-to expert person on the anti-SLAPP statute and a particular issue of that pertains to a lot of your clients that keeps popping up over and over, but it's not been decided yet. And so, eventually that's going to make its way up through the courts and it's going to get ruled on. In the meantime, though, there's going to be a lot of disputes where you've got to figure out how that works. Yeah. Or the legislature might come in and change the statute. And so things are constantly changing. And so you might, like you said, it's like a small part of your practice for maybe a short period of time, but it's still a way for you to kind of get plugged in. Yeah. It can lead to speaking opportunities, which then just further lead to more speaking opportunities on different topics down the line. So I think definitely don't be afraid in that sense of getting too pigeonholed. I can relate to that. I can see that fear. And if it's something where it's like 95% of your practice, that's maybe something a little bit different. Right. If you truly hate it and it's that big. Exactly. Yeah. That's maybe not great.
Not ideal. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And that's a good distinction to make. All right. Last topic I want to ask you about as we're wrapping up our time. And I know your firm is still, just over a year old, but as I'm sure will, if you want to, grow and add people and hire people and all those things, what is something that you think is really important for candidates to know that are looking to move firms and appeal to someone like you for a position with your firm? What's something that you'd be really looking for that would be important?
I think that I'd be looking for strong advocacy skills, strong writing, especially, and also oral advocacy skills. I'm not this is all hypothetical, of course, because right now I'm a true solo, but I would like to expand, and I am, thankfully getting to the point where I am busy enough that I'm starting to look at ways that I might branch out a bit. But I think that as a person myself who was not on law review and didn't graduate, number one in my class or anything, those things aren't as important to me as just, can you write and can you research? Can you find the answer? Do you have that mindset of being a lifelong learner? Mm-hmm. Are you open to feedback and getting criticism and looking for ways to improve? I think those would probably be the biggest things I would look for.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Before we do our rapid fire questions here at the end, is there anything that we haven't covered yet or anything that you would want to share before we wrap up?
That's a great question. No, I think this has been a fun conversation, and it goes by so fast.
I know.
I could keep talking for another hour.
It really, really does. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
All right. So here we go. Rapid fire questions. Name one trait or characteristic that you most want to see in an associate.
Oh man, I think I just said that one. I guess lifelong learner.
There you go.
Someone who is going to be that.
What habit has been key to your success?
To-do lists.
There you go.
Always keeping a to-do list.
Your favorite app or productivity tool?
The Calm app. Meditation.
Ah, yeah. Yeah. I'm hearing that advertised a lot right now.
And great background noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your favorite social distancing activity?
I've gotten into sewing and costuming.
There you go. All right. What's the last thing you made?
Last thing I made, I was working on for Halloween. If you've seen the show Schitt's Creek with
Yes.
Moira Rose, one of her outfits.
Okay.
She has an outfit that looks strikingly like a kind of like a Pope's outfit that she wears.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was working on that for Halloween. Halloween obviously didn't quite pan out. We're still in the midst of the pandemic. So that one kind of went on the back burner. But
got it.
It'll be fun. I'll finish it someday.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah, that's great. And then lastly, your favorite legal movie?
I'm going to say Hamilton. I think it's legal adjacent. He's a lawyer.
Hey, there you go. Finally, some affirmation. We did Hamilton on the podcast as a special episode, and it was a question as to whether it was legal or not. We chose to say yes, it was, and do it. So now we have official affirmation.
It totally is, and I find I always get really pumped up at the part of the song where they talk about him writing nonstop, working nonstop, and Hamilton wrote the other 51 Federalist Papers. I love that part. So to me,
great.
that's like Appellate Lawyer 101.
Absolutely. Why do you write like you're running out of time, right?
Yes, exactly. I have my Hamilton snow globe right here on my desk. Obviously, the podcast folks won't be able to see this, but
it is awesome.
Got A. Ham sitting right here with me.
So have you seen the show live?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was
original cast or new
amazing.
cast?
No. I saw it for the first time in Chicago.
So did my wife.
And
she went to Chicago and saw it.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was just everything I ever wanted it to be. It completely lived up to the hype. And then I was able to see it again when it came to Dallas on the tour. So
that's awesome.
It's awesome.
That's so cool. Well, awesome. Morgan, thank you so much for taking the time to come and visit. It's been great to catch up with you. And I wish you and your young new firm all the best. I know you're going to have great success.
Thanks, Daniel. And thanks for having me. It's been fun.
All right, my thanks again to Morgan McPheeters for joining us on the show. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider doing two things for me? Would you subscribe so you don't miss an episode? And then would you rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen? If you have suggestions or thoughts about the show, or if I could help you in any way, please email me directly, daniel@varsitysearch.com. Also, don't forget, if you're interested in any of the opportunities that we mentioned at the top of the show, or just want to visit about what opportunities might be out there for you, would love to talk with you about it. So please get in touch with me, daniel@varsitysearch.com. All right, that's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we'll talk with you next time.